How many of you have heard of the phrase food is medicine? That's almost all of you. And how many of you actually understand it? Because I know in this room there are physicians who actually understand medicine, but I don't see too many physicians who understand food. What I'm going to try to do is to bring you up to speed on how the two worlds of nutrition and medicine are starting to collide and give you a glimpse at the future of what food as medicine will really be like. Before I do that, though, I want to actually just bring us all back to the old man himself, Hippocrates, who lived in a time when people didn't have a lot to eat. They ate fresh foods. There were no processed foods or ultra-processed foods, so to speak. And he's the one that actually coined the term, let food be thy medicine. But back then, it was really serious because they were actually mendicating to themselves going forward and not actually trying to treat disease that had already left the barn. So, where do we take 2,000 years of wisdom and move it into the future? Before we go to the future, let's look at the present day, right? So everybody knows that this is the unfortunate scenario, as was described expertly by my colleagues Dari Matsafarian, who's the dean of the Tufts Nutrition School, and Dan Glickman, who's a former Secretary of Agriculture. And the idea really is that our food is really compromising our healthcare system. In the United States, about 500,000 deaths. Worldwide, about 11 million deaths a year attributed to poor diet. And this is actually the study that they cited from JAMA, showing that the state of the U.S., of health in the U.S. over the course of 25 years, if you take a look at all those disease entities that are in small type on the right-hand side, and look at the number one risk for mortality, it's dietary risk, accounting for neoplasms, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. Right? So these are the chronic diseases that actually ail our system, our healthcare system, that we're trying to figure out a way, as we've been talking about over the last few years, how to do early detection, how to do monitoring, how to actually do the appropriate types of feedback. So let's dive a little bit further into dietary risk to understand what that is, because most of us think of dietary risks as foods that we should cut out of our lives, right? Human nature abhors deprivation, so we don't really want to cut things out of our life. In fact, if I were to tell you something to remove from your life, you might actually at some point, after I told you that, think about adding it, sneaking it in, just so that you can actually try that. Now, what are the things that we know about dietary risk? We know that we're not eating enough nuts and seeds, fruits and vegetables, low in omega-3 fatty acids, and we're eating too many processed foods like red meat and processed meats, and of course, sugar-sweetened beverages. But that doesn't mean that this is the solution to health. The solution's really coming out of economic drivers. So this is about $2.5 trillion of burden that is attributed to some of these dietary risks. Diet isn't the full cause to these. There's lots of other things we've talked about, epigenetics, genetic factors. There's other lifestyle issues, stress, social issues that actually are determinants of health and disease as well. But I do think that we have to start here to take a look at what we can actually do about it. Now, we are also not only interested in our persons and our families and our communities, we're also interested in the planet. And in January of this year, the Eat Lancet Commission, which is an international coalition, released a statement, a study that said basically in order to meet sustainability goals by 2050, we have to halve the amount of red meat and sugar that we eat, and we have to double the amount of fruits and nuts and vegetables in order to be good not only for the person, but also for the planet. And this kind of just raised a whole other set of issues that in some ways are controversial, but also help to bring the focus of nutrition and food and health into clarity. You've got economics, you've got policy, global policy, you've got sustainability. So it's not just no longer about the person going up on the podium talking about a vegan diet. We're really talking about something that has true economic value and a driver for opportunity as well. Now, different states now actually have food as medicine programs. Now, even though most of us here said, well, we're not really sure what that means, I can tell you that it's starting to be legislated. Even insurance companies actually are beginning to talk about, cancer protection in a bag. And so the vernacular of food as medicine is now actually starting to reach the public and corporations. And it's also on Capitol Hill. There was a bipartisan announcement of the formation of a food as medicine working group within the Hunger Caucus that is now actually meeting to talk about this issue as well. And then finally, even the Vatican has gotten involved. This is actually from a conference that I gave an address at, talking about using diet to mobilize our defenses against the disease and a degrading environment. And so you can kind of see this is no longer really a bunch of extremists talking about vegan diets and at the salad bar. We're really talking about a kind of a global awakening. And that's really what I want to share with you, is that this global awakening is going to drive things into the future. So what does that mean? Does that mean that we all just go to the veggie counter at the Whole Foods to be able to get a plate full of healthy foods? This is actually what most people think about as food as medicine. Let's get rid of all the bad stuff, let's pile up a bowl, and let's go ahead and munch down. But if you think about it, this is a solution, but it's not the whole solution. And it can't be, because there's a lot of science that is still unknown, that still needs to be unraveled about what it is about food. I mean, are there superfoods? Is there a super supplement? Probably not. There are no super drugs either. What we know is that the body actually is very complex and actually responds to foods on an individual as well as a systemic level in ways that we barely understand. So, where are the good ideas? Where's the scientific evidence, the basis for actually innovation going into the future coming from? I'm actually not going to talk about the plant-based food movement, because there's plenty of other people out there that are very well qualified to talk about that. I'm actually not going to talk about sustainable farming or regenerative agriculture. There are other people that are talking about that important topic as well. But I will actually tell you that out of what we're thinking about, there's in terms of science, there's some really amazing innovations that really reflect the singularity of food as medicine, food and health, and the future of nutrition. This is just a partial list of some of the actual innovations that are underway, some of which are already available, like the Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat. But there are some other amazing things that are actually in various stages, in some cases of advanced development, that are going to be impacting how we view our dinner plate and the offerings related to nutrition. I'm showing you this picture really to spark your imagination, because while we're here on Earth, we can choose whatever we want to eat. But one day, when humans become extraterrestrial, and we all know the efforts that are underway to be able to get us there, it's just going to be us against the environment. And the environment outside of Earth is hostile. We'll have to actually take countermeasures on a continuous basis in order to be able to protect our immune system, protect our bone marrow, protect our DNA. The radiation from outer space is going to be relentless and damaging. So, an interesting challenge I'm going to give to you, mental frameworks, is to think, if you really wanted to study food as medicine and nutrition, model this a future human living in space, and think about what it is when you start from nothing, and when you're pitted against damaging forces. What do we need to do to maintain health? So this is almost the ultimate model to think about, is really how humans will actually live successfully in space. So where does that take us? Well, that takes us to real science. You can't hand wave that answer. So I'm going to suggest to you that some of the answers to the future for food as medicine is going to come out of the pharmaceutical world. Now, I'm a physician and also a vascular biologist. I've spent the last 30 years working to help develop medicines that can actually influence angiogenesis, which is how the body grows blood vessels. It's a common denominator of diseases. There's 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels packed inside our bodies. It is the common denominator to cancer, heart disease, stroke, blindness, obesity, diabetes, about 70 different disorders. And I can tell you from my work, which has actually led to a number of FDA-approved drugs and devices, that there are some amazing insights that I think we can apply to understanding how food can be used as medicine. And the reason that we have to tap into this is because of the investment. Since over the last 25 years, 802 new FDA-approved drugs. We cannot overlook this huge data set, this experience, this experiential information coming out of the investment in life sciences. And so what are we learning from there? And this is just a list of 32 of the interventions I've personally been involved with. And so my street cred is that, look, science can be turned into practice, but it really needs to go through a pretty rigorous process of validation, testing, and then ultimately figuring out how to actually get it to market. So some of the things that we're learning over the last 25 years, in fact, is the genome in ways that we've never even imagined we could know previously. And now, of course, we can do gene editing. We've also figured out the human kinome, which is sort of the interrelationships of cell signaling pathways. And many of the cell signal pathways are now druggable targets. And this is really the bread and butter of biotechnology and biopharmaceuticals today. We've also really more recently broken through the glass ceiling of immunotherapy, where it's now possible to activate and leverage the body's own immune system to fight disease. So now we're not actually treating the disease using synthetic chemicals, we're actually leveraging natural cells, in fact our own body cells, to allow them to actually overcome diseases, in some cases very successfully. So look at all this information that we've actually gained. How do we apply this to better understand food? Well, that's really what I set out to do about 10 years ago. I thought, what if you were to actually take everything we know about biotech development in the areas of angiogenesis, which developed more than 30 different treatments for cancer, diabetes, and vision loss. What if we took gene therapy, regenerative medicine, looked at the emerging field of microbiome and looking at immunotherapy? What if we actually took a look at everything that the industry, the biopharmaceutical industry, is working in those spaces and turned it inside out and didn't ask about disease, but asked about health? Didn't ask about drugs, but asked about food. So now I'm actually going to show you how we've actually proceeded with that idea and the things that we've actually found. I want to start with angiogenesis, which is my home base. Blood vessels growing throughout the body. We need blood vessels to bring oxygen and nutrients to every cell. Disease cells can actually hijack this process and cause all kinds of problems, including cancer. And angiogenesis is the microcirculation. So the old science of the circulation, when I went to medical school, was the large vessels, vasodilation and vasoconstriction, and that's pretty much it, and clotting. Now we know that the microcirculation is in fact a control system for all the organs in the body, and it's critical for regenerating organs, for modulating scar formation and healing and repair. And so I want to show you what happens though when you actually have too few blood vessels. You wind up having a whole series of ischemic diseases that can cause all kinds of serious chronic diseases. And when you have too many blood vessels, a loss of control where you have excessive florid-growing angiogenesis, blood vessels growing in the wrong place at the wrong time, you also have other diseases that are heavily associated with. And by the way, these are where I've asterisked the diseases for which there have been FDA-approved drugs developed, gone through phase 3, FDA approval, are now actually used in clinical practice. So let's take a look at what these medications are trying to do is to restore the body back to a healthy baseline of angiogenesis, the healthy microcirculation. So I want to give you an example of what we're actually finding out in terms of this field as it applies to nutrition. So we know that tumors actually are harmless until they hijack angiogenesis and grow blood vessels to feed themselves. In fact, a tumor will grow 16,000 times in volume once an avascular tumor has a blood vessel touching it and bringing it nutrition. And we know that you can cut off the blood supply to cancers through anti-angiogenic drugs. And in fact, there's a large number of those drugs that have actually been FDA approved. These are so-called, cancer starvers. And by starving a cancer, you cut off the blood supply, you interfere with the immune repellent properties of a tumor themselves. And again, this is hard-won biotech approvals. And one of the assays that was developed very early on that I was a part of with the National Cancer Institute is to really be able to do drug testing. so for drug discovery. What you're seeing on the left is actually an eagle's eye view of a rat's aorta. So that's actually been cross-sectioned, so it's just a couple of millimeters in diameter, and you're seeing the eagle's eye view. It's like a calamari ring, and inside the lining of the ring, you'll remember there's endothelial cells, the cells lining blood vessels, that actually, if you drop and grow these into a dish, and you drop in those factors that are necessary, that cancers do, you'll get this explosive starburst of blood vessels that are moving out radially to the outside. And when you actually test a drug, like the one on the right-hand side, you can shut those vessels down. Vessels go away, tumors can't be fed. This is actually part of the process of drug development, and I'm only sharing this with you as a historical point to show you how you can use the same assay system used in biotech for developing drugs to test food. All right, this is the pharmaceutical response to one of the drugs, in fact, the one I just showed you. And you can see this is a metastatic cervical cancer. On the left, you see the tumor after 18 weeks of treatment. You can see starving the cancer gives you a beneficial clinical result. The real question is, I used to ask this question all the time. You go to a cancer research lab and you can go onto a computer, you can actually overnight order some of your new chemicals to actually test to see their anti-cancer response, but you could call a pizza delivery shop and they could deliver it within 20 minutes, and you ask the researcher, how are you going to test that? And they wouldn't have any idea. So what we've actually started to do is to figure out how do you deconstruct food into its core components and test them in the same systems that drugs are evaluated. Food as medicine involves the validation, the testing, the discovery part. So I just want to show you a little bit of what we've done by taking a broader view of the farmer's market, right? So these are all healthy foods. You guys know that just by visual inspection. But let's take a look at what happens when you test drugs. In this case, on the horizontal axis, it's the magnitude of the effect of being able to of the blood vessels growing. So on the very top, the black line, you can see blood vessels growing out full bore, okay, like a tumor stimulating. And now you can add drugs, both cancer drugs in blue and common drugs, some of the off-label common drugs. By the way, we heard this brilliant talk a few days ago about Castleman's disease and looking for off-label drugs. So this is something we've been doing for a long time. And you can kind of see, look, off-label drugs have some of the great effects that specific indicated drugs actually have. Well, that's an interesting thing all by itself. But now, here's what happens when you blind your samples, and some of those samples are food. You can see food and drugs can go head-to-head against each other if you extract the food and take a look in the same system that's used for drug discovery. And this has actually opened up the eyes of folks like myself and my colleagues to sort of say, wow, what else can we actually be testing in this system? And can we move our testing of food through the same rigorous process that are used in the biopharmaceutical space? So I want to give some examples. And again, this is lab. I'm going to try to show you how you put the whole picture together, because you can't run a clinical trial of foods in the same way that you can actually run for a drug. So this is the baseline system. Now look what happens when you actually extract soybeans. You shut that down. There's no estrogen receptors in here, okay? So this is like human estrogen, and soy plant estrogens are very different, but soy contains phytoestrogens, phytochemicals that actually are powerful inhibitors of angiogenesis. So this actually overturns some of this urban legend that women who are at risk for breast cancer or who have breast cancer should actually avoid soy. In fact, we know this is true because if you jump from the preclinical over into human studies, take a look at this study. This is actually published in JAMA, where they actually studied 5,000 women who already had breast cancer. And what they found is that those women who ate more soy actually had a lower risk of death. This is women with breast cancer. And it also, and if they had it completely treated, they had a lesser chance of recurrence as well. How much soy do they need to actually consume in order to get this effect? About 10 grams of soy protein per day. That's about the amount of soy protein in a cup of soy milk. So practical levels can be achieved, and this is actually a public health study that helps us to correlate what we're actually finding preclinically in drug development assays. So this is actually an example of what we can actually do to be able to make a case and start to dig a little bit deeper using the tools that we already have to understand food as medicine. Now, you might say, well, that was just one study you showed. How do we know that this is true on a larger, will it hold up over a larger larger studies. This is a meta-analysis, 17 studies, and you can see correlating breast cancer and soy intake in terms of death and survival in every single case. The survival advantage is in favor of soy consumption, not death. So, how do we actually overturn some of this urban legend that occurs? There's a lot of rumors that are out there in the consumer world. And you know, part of it is that really the FDA doesn't regulate, they regulate food safety. There's some regulation of dietary supplements. But really, there's no truth engine, really, that's evidence-based when it comes to our diet. So there's a lot of stuff that just gets floated around. And what I'm trying to do is to contribute to solving that. Tomatoes. Again, does it actually have harmful compounds into it because it's related to nightshade? That's like the latest urban legend. Well, tomatoes actually have a lot of carotenoids, one of which is lycopene. Well, lycopene inhibits angiogenesis in that rat aortic ring assay, which I showed you earlier. Well, that's pretty cool. What could that actually possibly be useful for? Let's jump back to the human studies. This is actually the health professionals follow-up study of 46,000 men, and it found that those men who ate 2 to 3 servings of cooked tomatoes per week had up to a 30% reduction in the risk of developing prostate cancer, which depends upon angiogenesis. And in fact, those men who did develop prostate cancer, when they looked deeply in the tumor, this is molecular pathology, they actually found that the men who ate more cooked tomato sauce actually had fewer blood vessels, and they also found that the tumors were less aggressive as well. So again, it's possible to actually engage the real medical community to begin looking at these questions. And then the other question is dose. What's the best dose, right? Like what's the best source of lycopene? Well, it turns out not all tomatoes were equal. This is actually 4 types of tomatoes. Have you ever gone into the farmer's market or the grocery store in the summer and you saw all these different types of tomatoes? Wouldn't you want to know which one is the most potent? Well, I do, and this is why we started to take a look at the relative lycopene levels of different tomatoes. And these are just 4 of the cultivars or varietals that actually have the highest levels. By the way, why do you have to cook the tomatoes? Because the lycopene coming off of a tomato on a vine is actually in a chemical conformation your body can't absorb. When you heat it, the ideal way of heating it is with olive oil, okay, not to boiling temperature, but simmering. So now think about Mediterranean cuisine. You change the chemical conformation into a form the body can absorb. So that makes a lot of sense. Here are some foods with anti-angiogenic activity that can cut off the blood supply feeding cancers, and also, by the way, other diseases associated with angiogenesis. I wrote a book called Eat to Beat Disease. There's plenty of lists all throughout those books, so you don't have to try to copy this down. Let me just flip to the other side. What about conditions where you don't have enough blood vessels, where you want to grow more blood vessels up to a healthy point? Well, we know that the biotech community is trying to develop therapeutic angiogenesis for coronary artery disease, ischemic heart disease, for peripheral arterial disease. Critical limb ischemia is a cause of amputation in the country associated with diabetes and atherosclerosis. So these are all the end stages of chronic diseases that we want to avoid. And some people say, well, you know, like if we could just eat more healthily, we'd actually be able to reverse heart disease. True. If we actually had the better type of dietary fat, we'd actually lower the risk of atherosclerosis, possibly. You know, and we've got the statins, of course, but is that really the solution? Probably not. So what could we actually do to actually grow blood vessels naturally? Well, this is an interesting study that showed beta-D-glucan found naturally in barley can be made into pasta. You can feed the pasta to animals that actually have a deficit in their hearts, where they're not getting enough blood vessels, or ischemic heart disease, and you can measure, and this is the only intervention, dietary deliver beta-D-glucan on the effect of angiogenesis, and you can actually grow blood vessels in their ischemic tissue with just a dietary intervention. Again, if I didn't tell you this was from pasta or barley, and I showed you this as a drug that's being discovered, you might get interested in this if you were an investor. And so again, this is the kind of stuff that people are starting to take a look at, is how do we use the tools? Here's another one. This is the peel of an apple that actually can actually be used to grow blood vessels with ursolic acid back in the ischemic hind limb model. And what's amazing is that these two sides actually don't antagonize each other. They actually work together. Foods with angiogenesis stimulating activity are quite amazing. Regeneration. Starfish regenerate, salamanders can regenerate, and people do regenerate as well. And we know that stem cells are called into action after injury. We know that the worse the injury, the more the stem cells respond. We also know that aging slows down our stem cells. We heard about aging the other day. And we also know that if you actually have lower stem cells, your chances of actually having a negative outcome of cardiovascular disease are worse. So what could you actually do to stimulate this besides going into clinical trials? Well, what about cacao? Studies have been done looking at chocolate, dark chocolate, cacao, the polyphenols, and in fact, they've actually studied this by looking at 60-year-old men with cardiovascular disease and feeding them high polyphenol cacao, and a month later, you could double the amount of circulating stem cells in their circulation. It's not the final answer, but it's an amazing point that you can actually do it. And they've studied this with larger numbers of people looking at lowering the incidence of heart disease as well. Omega-3 fatty acids also can increase the activity of stem cells. A lot of these medications can stimulate. What about cancer stem cells? This is one of the most amazing things to me because it's a holy grail to find something that can kill a cancer stem cell, which actually helps tumors recur. Well, it turns out that there are foods that inhibit cancer stem cells, and one of them, in fact, is the walnut. And this is a study that was presented at ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, in which they looked at 800 patients with stage 3 colon cancer getting regular treatment, chemotherapy, and then found that those who ate 2 or more servings of tree nuts a week, including walnuts, had a 53% improvement in survival and a 66% reduction in cancer recurrence after surgery. Why does that happen? I mean, look at this Kaplan-Meier curve. It's pretty amazing. If you had a drug that could do this added on top of the treatment, you would actually call this something that definitely should be explored further. How does that work? Well, it looks like when you extract something, the polyphenols from walnuts, you can actually kill colon cancer stem cells. Amazing. So again, biotech informing this. I want to just close quickly by showing you just a snippet of what the microbiome and immune system can actually do. 37 trillion bacteria in our bodies associated with all kinds of chronic diseases that we don't really have good answers for, clearly are connected. How do we treat our microbiome? Well, we can feed the bugs, we can give the bugs, and avoid things that can hurt the bugs. Here are things, there's some surprises. Kiwi fruit is prebiotic. When you actually do small pilot studies, and give female volunteers kiwi fruit, you increase their beneficial bacteria by 30% in the first day, and another type over the course of about 4 days. These are the foods that you can actually eat to actually consume bacteria. I'm not going to go into that in detail. And sourdough bread actually also contains a Lactobacillus reuteri that is used to make the dough sour. Now, what's really amazing is that this same bacteria used for sourdough can inhibit the growth of breast cancer. And the activity of lactobacillus doesn't require live bacteria. If you fragment them and sonicate them, the particles will actually have the same effect. This is actually showing a mouse study with a healthy diet and breast tumors. A fast food diet speeds up the growth of breast cancer, but then you add the probiotic Lactobacillus reuteri in the drinking water and let them eat a fast food diet, you decrease the risk, you decrease the growth, the speed of breast cancer growth. A lot of foods affect the microbiome. Now, the last thing I want to just close on is immunotherapy, which I think is one of the biggest breakthroughs. Jimmy Carter, our president, former president, actually had melanoma, spread to the brain. He received immunotherapy. The tumor responded, and now he's the oldest living president today, cancer-free. Not everybody responds, though, to these immunotherapies. In fact, there's a big gap between responders and non-responders. And what was discovered is that a single gut bacteria seems to be responsible for them, published in Science by Laurence Zitvogel. And what she found is that the people who responded to checkpoint inhibitors, one type of immune therapy, versus the people who did not respond, when they compared everything that they possibly could, they found the difference was one bacteria in their gut microbiome, Akkermansia muciniphila. And by the way, you can't actually eat that probiotic as a probiotic. The only way you can grow Akkermansia is by eating with food. So by having pomegranate, you can cause the goblet cells to secrete more mucus, which this bacteria likes to grow, and they will actually respond. And there's a lot of literature coming out talking about how to grow this particular type of homeostatic cancer surveillance, immune-producing bacteria. And think about the opportunities to combine this actually in the studies. So Akkermansia causes mucus secretion, which then allows immunotherapies to work better. Now, why am I even telling you this with the confidence I have? And it's because my mother, who was in her 80s, had metastatic endometrial cancer and was not given much chance to actually survive her disease. We got her tumor, we sequenced it, we found the smoking guns that would make her eligible for immunotherapy, and then we actually gave her foods that would actually support the Akkermansia growth, and she actually wound up becoming a complete responder. So again, now people are beginning to look really at how do we actually optimize immunotherapy, which is one of the expensive treatments. So this isn't food as medicine or food versus medicine, this is food plus medicine. A study of broccoli sprouts in young people actually getting the nasal flu vaccine showed in 29 healthy volunteers, if they had all had the nasal vaccine, but if they split them up, and one group actually got 2 cups of broccoli sprout in a shake, made into a shake a day, and the sprout eaters had 22 times more natural killer cells, T cells in their blood, and the NK cells had more power in the lab, and the sprout eaters had fewer viral particles in their nose as well. It's really important to pay attention to this and to really look at this. So it's not food as medicine, it's food and medicine. All about activating our body's health defenses. The future. This is going to take us into really distant locations that we can't even predict yet. The flavorome is actually looking at what are the substances that Mother Nature has imbued into foods and how they relate biologically. And so when we think about all these amazing things that I showed you earlier that people might be enthusiastic about because it really is today's innovations, I hope I've shown you a little bit about what is possible in the future by really taking really the best of what we've done already in biopharmaceuticals and applying that same kind of thinking. And I'll just close with this quote by Andrei Gide, who won the Nobel Prize. He said, "Man can't discover new oceans unless he's got courage to lose sight of the shore." And I think that's where we are with food and medicine. This is about losing sight of the shore that we always talked about. Just go vegan, eat sustainably. Like, yeah, we need to do all those things, but look at how much further we have to go. Anybody who wants to learn more about the details of what I've shown you and get the lists of the foods that can activate angiogenesis, stem cells, microbiome, DNA protection, and immunity, I wrote this book, Eat to Beat Disease. Feel free to connect with me, and I hope this is something that will impact the decisions you make this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for that tour de force. 2 quick questions. I don't think I ever had broccoli till I was 20, as my mom is here. Thanks, Mom. I never really ate what's good with my veggies. All those sort of green powders that combine some of these things, concentrated broccoli, can that help me? Question number 1. As opposed to the natural way. We all want to cheat, don't we?
Well, look, I mean, I think that it's completely legitimate to try to take versions of whole foods and try to create simplified ways to actually get as much goodness as you can. Right. But really, as what we've heard at Exponential Medicine is that we are just scratching the surface of being able to monitor how well we're doing. And we can have an objective measure that can show that the green stuff will do just as well as a serving of steamed broccoli, then we'll actually be able to compare those things. Right. In the meantime, I would encourage you to eat the whole food.
Eat your greens. Last question real quick. When you and I went to medical school, barely any nutrition. How do we encourage clinicians beyond nutritionists to start prescribing food for both prevention and therapy?
Right. Well, look, medically indicated meals is actually already starting, and I showed you the insurance companies, our payers, and self-insured employers are now beginning to actually reward people for making better choices. Doctors are really at the back of the bus on this, and I think one of the things that we all need to do is to encourage the young people coming through the ranks, and also the administrators who are actually looking at curriculum, and the board test designers to be able to put more information about nutrition, so we're not only thinking about medicines, we're actually thinking about food.
Got it. Thanks so much. All right.